So we are mostly done with the Wolfram language functions. I just quickly want to go through certain important concepts here. Think one is basically the evaluation environments. So evaluation environment is basically tells you, on which environment you are actually evaluating your cloud object basically. So we have three evaluation environments. One is session, another is public, and another is task. Session evaluation environment is associated with your cloud notebooks basically. So when you basically, this is my cloud notebook, for example, demo. And if you evaluate evaluation environment, you will see a session here, which basically tells you that you are doing evaluations or you are using a cloud notebooks. So that is one type of environment where you can use stuff in the cloud. Session environment uses session kernels at the back. uh, there are certain attributes associated with session kernels. So session environment is basically, if you want to use the kernels, Wolfram language engine for a longer period of time. For example, if you're working on a notebook and you want to, use that for let's say an hour or more, then might you will use the session kernels there basically. Then we have the deployment evaluation environment. So deployment evaluation environment comes into picture when you use API functions or cloud evaluate. We'll discuss those briefly in the second part, but the idea here is, the deployment evaluation environment will use a kernel which is a short-lived. Basically, it's a one-shot evaluation. It's not for, the deployment evaluation environment is not for, not to use kernels for a longer period of time. It's not something you can basically stick to it like a cloud notebook. And we'll see those, like, when we discuss the API functions. So just to quickly give you an example. So for example, we have a function called cloud evaluate. It basically takes an expression, let's say 3 factorial, and if it evaluates that expression in the cloud instead of in your desktop notebook. So when I evaluate this, I return a 3 factorial, but underneath this, it used the deployment or public kernel, which is basically a short-lived, like short-lived in the sense it's a one request usage. It's not like, you will use the same kernel again and again. So if I evaluate this again, it will use a different kernel underneath it. So that's why it's called a short-lived. And then we have another evaluation environment for, task stuff. So in Wolfram language, we have so a well-ordered support for scheduled tasks. I'll not be covering those stuff because it's a separate topic. But just to give an idea, you can use tasks basically to run your stuff at a regular interval. So, and those functions uses task kernels underneath. So the advantage of task kernels is that, it is their lifetime is in between a longer and shorter term. So basically, if you want to use your task for a varying interval of time, it's better suited to use task kernels under that. But yeah, that's just a overview. Mostly you will use session kernels and, deployment kernels in majority of your application, unless you are using tasks. Okay. So yeah, so this is here we're discussing more deeply into the evaluation environment, but the idea is similar. Let's see. So here I'm evaluating something on my desktop notebook, and it returns me a session. So any evaluation on any notebook, whether it's a cloud or desktop, it uses a session environment basically. Then to use a deployment environment, we have to use API function, which we discussed basically briefly, I think, a few slides back. But don't worry if you don't understand completely. The idea here is, we are deploying an API function and asks to evaluate this stuff basically, and then we are using URL execute to basically call our API. So let's see what it gives. So here it gives the evaluation environment on the for the public kernel, which is the web API, and then basically it gives the other stuff. So notice that this process ID, if you evaluate multiple times, it will always use the different process ID, which indicates that deployment kernels use different deployment kernels are used each time to evaluate something. Right. Uh, this is something similar to this. These are just the examples which uses the deployment kernels. API function is one. Then using manipulate, deploying manipulate on the cloud is another one, and then using cloud evaluate is another example, basically, which we discussed. So all these uses deployment kernels. Notice that the evaluation environment here is web evaluation, and here it is web API. Both are similar. Basically, both uses deployment kernels underneath it. And then lastly, we have Cloud Submit, which is basically evaluates this expression, at a regular interval, which basically uses tasks underneath to evaluate it. But this is just to show you, it uses the task evaluation environment. I will not be going into detail in this one. We might not use much this in our next examples, but yeah, this is one example where you can create a task and then see what evaluation environment it uses. Include definitions, right? Include definitions is basically what does it what include definitions is, let's say, if you want to deploy anything. So we have seen a lot of examples in our previous slides to deploy certain expressions, right, using cloud deploy and all that stuff. But we have not talked about, what if you want to deploy a function. Let's say, if you have created a function in your notebook and you want to deploy something on it, deploy something which uses that function. So include definitions comes into picture if you want to deploy the definition of the function also, rather than just the expression. So we'll see how. So let's say we have created a new function called padded sum. It basically creates this association from the text string. And let's try this function locally. So when you provide a machine name, it gives basically my machine name and then the hash of it. And let's try to evaluate this function on cloud, basically. So notice that here we are calling cloud evaluate, and this is our expression which we want to evaluate on cloud. So here we are calling padded MD5 sum, but notice that on the cloud we don't have this definition, right? So include definitions comes into picture when you want to use the definition of a function which you want to deploy along with the expression, right? So we'll see basically. So let's say after evaluating, we have seen it has given this result, right? So in order for this expression to work, the padded MD5 sum definition needs to be included as well, right? Okay. So let's see. So if you see the options of cloud evaluate, you will see that include definition is set to true by default. So this means that whenever you use a function in your cloud evaluate, or when in your expression, any expression you want to deploy, it automatically includes the definitions of that function from your local notebook. So it works on cloud evaluate because of this setting. If you don't want to include your definition, let's say if you want to include a certain other definitions of your functions, it will basically not use that. So let's see. So I want to evaluate certain, let's say f of 2. So I don't know what is f, right? So my cloud, I don't have a definition of f. So it will basically return unevaluated here. This is because there is no definition of f to include from, and that is why it returns basically unevaluated form. And if you basically use any definition here, okay, 1 second. If you create a definition here, basically n tutorial, then this will take that. So this will use the definition. So cloud evaluate will basically, in addition to taking this expression, it will take the definition of this function as well, using that option. You can use include definition false if you don't want to include any definition. Maybe you want to use some different definition of a function. Let's say padded empty5 sum, which is already on your cloud. Then you might want to use that include definitions to false. But yeah, this is all about the include definitions, which you might use underneath by default when you call API functions or cloud evaluate. But in rare chances, you might want to use set the settings to false. But just in case, yeah, you should be aware about that.